Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of my video game devlog. I'm Chris, and over these past couple weeks I got a lot done, including what you're seeing right here. I finally completed the character animation, as well as tweaking a few things about it, and then I added a brand new building into the game that's hopefully going to usher in a bunch of other buildings in the future. So without wasting any more time, let's jump in and check out what I got done. Now the first thing I worked on was upgrading the inventory system. If you remember from last episode, I worked on this extensively, but there were quite a few bit of tweaks and bug fixes that I wanted to address in this episode, so I spent most of the first week there. Next up, I finished the player sprite and even fixed player movement issues. Now this took me quite a while, and I'll give you a time lapse later on of the process, but it was basically going over what I'd done before, adding the new character animations, adjusting some of the character animations to correct them, and finally coming out with the final product, which I'm pleased with. And then finally, I had some time to work on this basic townhouse model, which I implemented over most of the second week, and it was very time-consuming. I have an awesome time-lapse to show you for that one as well, but first of all, let's take a look at the inventory system changes. Even though I spent most of last sprint working on the inventory, there were quite a few things I wanted to change. Nothing massive from the looks of it. If I pull up inventory right here, you can see it still looks very similar, but you'll notice a few main things. First of all, we've got these numbers right here that explain just how many items are in that slot, which is huge. I want to be able to make stackable items in this game, and so this was important. Not only that, but if you see, I can drag an item around, and I'll get a little indicator telling me if that item can go in that slot. If there's already an item in that slot, even though it could normally go there, it doesn't show the indicator, and it does show the indicator if there's an item identical to that, showing that you can stack it. Now, to demonstrate that stacking works here, I can just drag this item over here, and now we have 7 right here, and all of this works with the save functionality. So this was something I really wanted to get working, and it took me quite a while to implement it up into the save. So if I hit the save button right here, then I can back out of the game, come back in, and all of this will be up to date. So I'm just going to hit save, restart the game as if I'm turning off the game on the console or whatever, and hit I, and the items are up to date. Now, this is still just the early stages for the inventory. I'm going to keep coming back to this. I'm going to keep refining it. And obviously it needs a facelift. But this is the basic functionality that I want to see in here, and I'm not going to touch this for a little while. I've spent a lot of time on this, and I want to move on to different things. So that's the inventory system, and that, again, like I said, that was most of week 1. But week 2 was all dedicated to art. I worked on this character right here, fixed the side views, which I don't know if I'm completely pleased with them. I know I complained about them a good bit last sprint, but they're good enough for me right now. And then I've added the character animation on here. This was a fairly tedious process, so I think the best way for me to show you how I got this done is a time lapse. So I haven't really decided what I was going to say for this time lapse. I just kind of hit record. Well, this is my first time lapse, and we're kind of starting out with a boring one. I've got this going 64 times the speed it actually took because it's pretty repetitious, as you can see. I'm basically just cleaning up those first animations that I had, trying to get them lined up, looking like it's actually a side-on view at an angle, not just a direct side-on view. And then I move on to coloring the character in. And this was kind of zen, you know, just copying and pasting a whole lot, cleaning it up. But it took just enough mental energy that it was pretty exhausting. I finally get it working. I pull in the sprite into Unity, then go back and make the next images. You can see me copying and pasting all the head because it stays basically the same. And then going frame by frame, adding the base colors, and then adding the highlights, the shadows, and everything in there. I don't know, it's pretty basic. There's not much going on here. But I will say I want to automate this process because I'm going to have so many different characters and NPCs in this world. I don't want to be spending hours on animations for every character. And this is just the 8 different directions for walking. What about running or sleeping or fighting? I'm working on a solution, or thinking about my solution for automating this process where hopefully I can just draw the 360 rotational views. So those 8 images, press generate, and then it creates all of these different sprites for me. I don't know if this is possible, and as far as I know, there's no software out there that already exists. So if I want to do this, I'm going to have to do it manually. But I think it's going to be worth the time. It could take me a couple months or even longer to create that software, and it still may require me to work a little bit on cleaning up each image or cleaning up a few images within the animation. But it will mean I won't have to do this process every time. It may take a couple months, but it will save so much time in the future if I end up having like hundreds of characters in here. 1 time lapse down, 1 to go. I rounded out the sprint working on this house model that I showed in the introduction. And I didn't really know exactly where I was going to go with it. I knew I wanted it to be medieval, but I didn't really have a process down. So I just basically pulled up some images from Google, pulled up my old temple, and started messing around with color palettes. I quickly figured out that I didn't want to start there, so I moved on to trying a different seamless rock texture. I've done these before, they've turned out well in the past, but it wasn't going well. I didn't really have a clear direction, so I finally scrapped that and realized what I need to do is just move on to blocking out a basic house, and then I could go from there. So I pulled up a few more images from Google, which I have off to the side out of view, and I just start going through here, laying down different ideas, putting in the polls, just playing around, and I really was willing to just back up and undo anything I had done here. This part of the process took a very long time, a lot of undoing, until I finally got something that I really liked, and I'm glad I spent all of that extra time working on it, because I ultimately got this. I think it looks good, and so I moved on to the next pieces. Just have my little character here to measure scale, and also color palette as well. And I'm just going through adding a few more details here and there. Again, still blocking out basic shapes. I don't have any of the coloring. But then I move on to the roof. This was a very time-consuming process. It's actually the roof that makes the camera angle clear. So if you look at the house to the left, the temple I made, you can tell that we're looking at sort of a 45-degree angle. This first roof I made, not only did it not really look medieval, sort of Roman, but it's sort of straight on. And because the roof isn't telling you what the angle is, I ran into the same issue with this roof as I did with the character side view. It just looks like we're looking straight onto the side and not in the sky, looking down on it. When I realized that after putting all that time into that roof, I scrap it and I move on to a different idea, which still wasn't working. I tried to have these bending thatched roof, and it looks more in the theme, but I quickly realized that's not going to work either. And so getting inspiration from the temple over off to the side, I make a roof that you can see the front and the top very clearly, and immediately the house starts to come together a bit more. You can tell that we're looking at it at a 45-degree angle or something like that. And I move on to adding in some detail once I've blocked out that roof. So now I'm just going through adding some highlights and some shading. So the highlights being where the light's hitting, and then the shadow obviously where the light can't see. That's just to give it a little bit more depth, make the poles look like they're coming out from the plastered wall. So I'm just going through, and the further we get in, the slower this process gets. I really thought I was going to be able to complete 2 or 3 buildings throughout this week, but this building took 3 days. It's a long process. I'm sure it's going to come faster as I get into the swing of things, but it's not something to just be just throw out there and assume it's going to be good in a few hours. So now I'm moving onto the roof. Thankfully I found a good tiling that I really liked, so started cleaning that up. And it's good that I can copy and paste a lot up here, because there wasn't a whole lot of copying and pasting happening in the bottom. And then I move on to shading that. I'm basically just trying to add in colors to make it clear that this side of the roof has the light shining on it, and this side of the roof doesn't. I usually have my light source coming from the top left, and I'm continuing that with this game, or at least with the images that I'm putting in here. And then I move on to sort of weathering it up, and this is a little trickier than it may seem. I'm just adding in little dots of dark and light, but I can't overdo this. If I overdo this, then the house looks derelict or run down, and I'm not going for that. I'm just trying to give it a weathered feeling. So, like, I put in all those bricks, and I remove most of them just because it's adding too much. I want this to be pretty subtle. Then I go out on a limb and decide to add this brick texture at the bottom. I failed with my first brick texture, but I decide really going to go for it this time, throwing in these bright, vibrant colors to really finish out the build and solidify this as like it's built on stone. I wrap that up. I just add a few more details here and there, giving it a bit more weathered, and then I move on to the roof and just add some algae or moss, I should say, just to give it really a feeling of being used. Cementing it in the landscape. And at that point, not only did I think I was going to be able to create 3 buildings, but I thought I was going to be able to create the interiors as well. This is just the exterior, as you can see. So right here, I'm just adding in the collision, making it work. I realize I don't have the grass, so I go back in and add a bunch of grass in there. But that's basically it. After 3 days, I have one image of a house. And I think it looks good. Like, as you can see here, I like it, but it took so long. I need to find a process that takes this step a little further. I can add more detail, I can add buildings throughout the set, and basically what I want to do in the future is be able to create one of these things or something like this every sprint. And so I'm getting a jump on adding buildings, adding objects, adding characters, so that while I'm working on gameplay, I'm also fleshing out the world itself. But either way, that brings us to the end of another sprint, and I am excited to see what mechanics and art assets I'll be able to create in the next 2 weeks. If you liked this video, please leave it a like. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.